make. Alright, that's runes. Now let's talk about masteries, and masteries are incredibly complex. They changed a lot in the new season. Instead of being stat-based, giving you attack speed and attack damage and ability power and cooldown reduction pretty much down the line in every single one, they're much more playstyle based. They're much more based around what type of champion am I playing, what type of champion am I playing against, and what type of champion is on my team, which means they're going to change a lot. And even if I make a page saying this is the Aurelia page, there are probably still going to be multiple Aurelia pages based on what kind of game that we are in, which makes it kind of really awkward and interesting. So instead what I'm going to be doing to start out the mastery discussion is actually bringing up how you should think about the masteries in the new season. The big one I'm going to bring up actually is that the number one thing to look at is what is your 18-pointer going to be? What are you going to be doing for Keystone Masteries way down here? Critical strike focus, attack speed focus, general damage focus. If I burst, I get some movement speed. Here's another burst mastery right here. How about if I shield and heal my teammates? If I'm going to be auto-attacking a lot and need to stay alive as a melee champion, typically. Do I need a big, fat chunk of health? Or do I want a bunch of damage reduction and maybe to keep my teammates alive? You look at one of these 9 masteries and you choose which of these most defines my playstyle. What am I going to be using here? And you start there. And the reason being that we start at the very bottom of the tree and ignore the rest of it is that because you can only put 18 points into a tree and you've got 30 total points to spend, you can get the 12 pointers in another tree anyway. You don't choose to go down to Ferocity because of Oppressor, because you can get Oppressor by going 18 Cunning and then going over to this one. Focus on the 18 pointer and then think, do I go 6 and 6 in the other two, or do I put 12 into a different tree? Well, once you've decided your keystone, let's talk about what happens in these other trees. What's in the 12 to 16 point range in these other trees? Let's first start with Ferocity. You cannot get into Ferocity without investing in damage, right? Rank 1, attack speed or ability damage right away. You cannot invest in this without getting more damage. So if you don't care about damage, if you're playing support Leona, if you're playing a really big dumb tank Scion and you don't care about this kind of stuff, then don't invest in the Ferocity tree. You can only get damage in this part, then you can get a little bit of damage, maybe a little bit of regen here, a little bit of ability power and attack damage, a little bit of regen here, and then once again, getting 12 points in, more damage. Of course, 18 points is more damage as well. Okay, what about the Cunning? Cunning tree here. Well, there's actually a lot you can do. There's actually a lot. Pretty much anyone can go 12 points Cunning and feel good about it. You've got random utility like move speed out of combat. You've got laning prowess with bonus damage to minions and monsters. Every jungler probably is going to want at least 6 points here for runic affinity because buff duration is great. Anyone who wants more regen can go secret stash and get their potions and stuff to last a little bit longer. But if you want more damage, the only way to get damage is in the Ferocity tree down the line and 12 points or more in Cunning, with Merciless right here dealing damage to champions who are low. There's also a bunch of mana regen, which means if your goal isn't damage, you can still get things like this, and you can still get things like Dangerous Game or Bandit. And I think anyone that is playing a support champion should be going at least 12 Cunning, period, because of Bandit, because of how much gold you're going to be getting from this mastery, getting gold whenever there's nearby minions dying that your teammates are killing, or just simply harassing the enemy champions. Dangerous Game, just good in general. I mean, once you're already investing in Merciless and you're a damage-focused champion, you might just want to go into Dangerous Game so that when you're in these team fights, you're getting your health back. You can see what kind of stuff is in 12-point Cunning. All glass DPS, once again, should be going 18-12-0 or 12-18-0. There's a lot of utility here, and that's fine. And again, all support should be going 12 points into Cunning. Now, finally, Resolve. And I want to really be clear about what's in Resolve here. If you are trying to become tanky and you weren't already planning on building tank stats, there's not a lot for you here in Resolve. All the tankiness grants here in Resolve are regeneration, tank stats if you're already building tank stats. Tough Skin is essentially regeneration. It's basically less damage taken. Move speed out of combat, bonus regen when you're already regenerating and life-stealing, a bonus % total health, which is not that much. If you're going to already invest 12 points into a tree and the only raw defensive stat you're getting is % total health, that's not a lot to go for. And I think we're going to see much less splashed Resolve from people because of this. But this is, of course, very good for true tanks. Perseverance, some more health regeneration, and Insight, some cooldown reduction. So you can see there's not a lot of real tank stats in the first 12 points. I already said, look at your big gold medal Keystone Masteries to start out, but if you're going for the next 12 points, there's not a lot of tank stats here. There's some regen. If your laning phase sucks, you can get Recovery, you can get Tough Skin, you can get Runic Armor, you can get Perseverance. You can survive a laning phase by going into here, but you can't just say, well, I'm actually a little bit tanky. That's not what really happens here. But tanks will get tankier, percent bonus stats. Here's some bonus stats, here's some tenacity, but you can't get tankier otherwise. Okay. Let's take some time and actually describe now all of these masteries and what they're going to be doing for you so that these things can start keying into what you might want to be doing for yourself. Let's start with Ferocity, easy stuff. Attack speed or ability damage, you pretty much just pick one. It's really obvious these are both damage, and it's whether you're auto attack focused or ability focused. Pretty easy comparison. Next up, Double-Edged Sword and Feast. Double-Edged Sword is increased from the 2015 season. If you're ranged, you deal and take 2% additional damage. That's actually kind of a lot. I don't think you'll be running this often as a ranged champion, but there's a few that will do this. Otherwise, Feast is incredible. It's a lot of health back. You're getting almost 1 health per second out of this mastery, which is a ton. This will add almost 50% to everyone's base health regen at the start of the game if they can trigger Feast on cooldown. This is a big deal. Vampirism is just a nice catch-all. Again, if you're a damage-focused laner, you're going to be hitting minions a lot. You're going to be hitting your opponent a fair bit. Lifesteal and Spell Vamp are nice, but also keep in mind the natural talent's quite nice as well. It's not amazing, but it's some extra stats. Stats aren't bad. Stats are useful. If you get down here, maybe you care about it. I think most people will end up running Vampirism, but maybe you'll see natural talent. And then finally, 12 points in a Ferocity. Bounty Hunter, 1% increased damage for each unique champion you kill. This will never be run on support. This really won't be run on almost anyone that's not trying to be a true carry, because you wouldn't be going this far down the offensive tree, the Ferocity tree, without having the ability to do this kind of stuff. But there are some champions that are really good at triggering the other one. Bounty Hunter, you can't guarantee you trigger. In fact, it's pretty hard to actually have killed all 5 enemy champions at some point during the game, so you're really never getting that 5% mark. Oppressor works from level 1, right? If you're playing Aurelia, in this page's example, you're going to be able to trigger your own slows. If you're playing Scion, you're getting your own slows if you're coming down here. If you're playing AP Malphite, you can trigger your own slows. So Oppressor has a lot of value here, especially as like a damage support going Rylays or any mage like an Orianna who's got Command Dissonance. And then you get down to the bottom here, percent Armor Pen, percent Magic Pen. It's obvious stuff right here. And then you go down to the Keystone Masteries. Warlord's Bloodlust is if you're a Critical Strike focused champion. Fervor of Battle is if you're an attack speed focused champion. And then Deathfire Touch is good regardless. But the thing to keep in mind is Deathfire Touch only triggers on abilities. So if you're Corki, this is nice. This matters for you. But if you're playing Caitlyn, you're not getting a lot out of Deathfire Touch. You're never, almost ever going to be triggering this. And even if it would do a lot of damage, it's not hitting all that often. Keep that in mind with Deathfire Touch. Let's talk about Cunning. Well, this is going to be able to, you can pretty much dump points into Cunning no matter what champion you're playing. There's stuff that's kind of useful regardless. And in fact, a lot of champions will be running 6 to 12 points into Cunning because it's just easy to do. Wanderer, move speed out of combat, solid, works out pretty well, ends at 3% at full points. Savagery, almost every laner should be running this in some way. This is a big deal. 5 bonus damage to minions and monsters is a very big deal because I want to point something out to you guys. Right? In the old masteries, that Butcher mastery is gone. Also, the flat 4 attack damage is gone as well. Which means you are actually losing a lot of minion damage in the 2016 season without running Savagery. You're also missing the 21 pointer in the old masteries that gave you 3% total damage, period. You're missing out on like 8 to 9 damage on hit at the start of the game, even if you're running the same runes and the same items before. So Savagery is a big deal to help make that up, to help make last hitting a bit better, because it will be more difficult. Runic Affinity, good for every jungler, good for mid laners that are going to be getting buffs and whatnot. This also, by the way, now counts Dragon 5 and Baron. Also, the new jungle monster that spawns out of the Baron pit. It's kind of nice. There will be some value in this. But of course, Secret Stash is very good as well. This is what every support's going to be running. And it's, potions, flasks, and elixirs are better. If you are going to be buying health potions and not getting the refillable potions, then you're going to have them upgraded, and they're going to give more health and mana at the very start as well. This is just solid. It's just good in general. Moving on, Merciless is one of the only ways to get damage outside of the Ferocity tree. One thing to keep in mind is Merciless is not as good as you might think. This eventually becomes 5% increased damage to champions below 40% health. But keep in mind, once they're already down that low, they're probably gonna get overkilled and die anyway. The vast majority of combat in League of Legends is high health champions against high health champions, because everyone is chugging potions and life stealing and regenerating and getting back to full HP as fast as possible. The vast majority of your combat will not be under effect of Merciless, so don't take this to mean 5% increased damage 40% of the time. It's definitely not that. Don't overrate this mastery, especially because it's up against a very nice mana regeneration mastery. Meditation is actually very strong. It caps at 1.5% missing mana every 5 seconds, which is very good. If you're only at like 600 mana, which isn't even that much, it's a decent mid-game mana pool. You're getting 9 MP5, which is very good. That's very high, actually. So this is like 2 mana per second at 650 mana. That's really, really good. Again, you have to be missing that much, but this is still a meaningful amount of mana regeneration. And with a champion like Gangplank, you'd run this Meditation Mastery instead of Merciless, because you care about spamming your spells and you're not going to be hitting low health targets that often. Next up is a ridiculous mastery. I think Bandit is probably actually incredibly overpowered. So first of all, as a support, you're going to run this anyway. You gain 1 gold for every nearby minion killed by an allied champion. This existed already, but you're gaining 3 additional gold, or 10 if you're melee, when hitting an enemy champion with an auto attack or a spell. So that got changed. Now when Brand hits W in the backline, he gets the 3 damage. When Zyra spawns a plant, the 3 gold. She gets the 3 gold. This now triggers off the same things that Spell Thieves triggered off of. This is a lot more gold now, which is why I say every support needs to be running this mastery, period. It's a ton. Also, if you're playing a tank in a lane, remember how I talked about the fact that Ferocity is not that important to you anymore because there's no real raw stats, it's just damage? If you're playing Maokai in the top lane and you throw a sapling at your opponent, you gain 10 gold on a 5-second cooldown. This is ridiculous. If you're playing Scion and you yell at a minion and it hits the opponent, you gain 10 gold for that. This is ridiculous. I'm actually pretty sure every tank ever is going to run 0, 12, 18 because of Bandit. Because of how ridiculous this mastery is. It's insane. It's up against Dangerous Game. Now, if I'm playing like a Marksman AD carry, maybe I harass enough for Bandit to be worth it, but Dangerous Game is still a very, very strong mastery here. Maybe just everyone runs Bandit and everyone runs 12 points Cunning. I'm not sure. But this thing is actually pretty ridiculous. It's probably going to get nerfed at some point, I'm going to guess. But keep in mind that 3 gold on a 5-second cooldown is not a ton of money. Ambient gold is up a lot in this season. Everyone gets 2 gold per second just for existing. And this thing caps out at 0.6 gold per second. And that is if you use it on cooldown, which is impossible. This is not straight ridiculous, but it is good. Dangerous Game is very good, though, if you're in the thick of things. This is actually pretty nice for you guys. It's just solid mastery. You get 5% missing health and mana if you get a kill or an assist, which happens pretty frequently in team fights. And when you get into a team fight and you get 5% health mana back, you can sometimes win the team fight off that. So don't underestimate this mastery too much. Now we get into the interesting things. Deep Cunning has damage. Remember I said earlier that 12 points... that you should care about your 18-point mastery first and then work back from there, and that all squids should be running 12-18-0 or 18-12-0 because you have armor and magic pen in Cunning. Now the math works out roughly for precision to be about as good as piercing thoughts or battering blows. You're getting armor and magic pen together for this mastery. But the thing I want to point out, and this is a really big deal, is that even if you are a hybrid damage dealer, like if you're playing AD Kennen, which actually does 50-50 physical and magic damage, this mastery is not enough reason to change your Keystone. I mean, in the ideal case where precision is just straight up better than piercing thoughts or battering blows, it doesn't matter because the Keystone is more important than that. Because even though precision's great, Thunderlord's Decree is not as good as Fervor of Battle on AD Cannon. So don't let this betray you. Don't let this make you go crazy. This is a nice to have. You're a damage dealer. But if you're not a damage dealer, you've got intelligence up in here. Now again, this is not the reason to go into the tree, but if you're already going for like a buff-focused play, like a Windspeaker's Blessing, then holy crap, intelligence is awesome. You can go 45 CDR on a champion now. That is ridiculous. That is amazing. You can have Janna shield up almost permanently. You can have Nami's buffs up so much more often. This is a very big deal. You can have Black Shield almost not have a cooldown or a downtime anymore. This could be a very big deal. 5% more CDR, 5% more CDR cap. It's also the reason why if you're going to run cooldown reduction at all in your glyphs, you're going to be running it in all of the glyphs. You're going to be running it as a factor of 10% because there is no longer any straggling CDR anymore in the game. It comes in factors of 10 or multiples of 10%, period. It gives you get 10 or 20 or your cap is raised by the same amount that you get. Multiples of 10 always. Talk about the stuff deep in Cunning, the gold medals here. The Keystone Masteries. Storm Raider's Surge is really sweet. If you do some burst damage, you gain some movement speed. This is just quite nice if you're doing burst damage and you don't need any more damage. But it's up against Thunderlord's Decree, and Thunderlord's Decree is actually really good. Your third attack or spell on an enemy champion shocks the area around them, dealing 10 damage per champion level, plus 20% of bonus attack damage, plus 10% of your ability power. And this deals magic damage. It also has a 30-second cooldown. Now, I tested it today, literally an hour ago. Thunderlord's Decree does not trigger off of Brand's passive, and it wouldn't trigger off of things like Liandry's Torment either, which means you have to actually land the attacks and spells on your opponents. I'm pretty sure it also wouldn't trigger off of Malzahar E as well, which means you have to actually land a salvo of spells for this to land, meaning poke supports cannot run this because they can't trigger it often enough. FYI. Even though it looks amazing and the base damage is really high, this is a good mastery. It does not work for those guys. What it is good on is champions like Jungle Evelyn, who are going to burst you at the very start of the fight and get a lot of damage down, and then their job is done. They got a lot of damage out. Good job. Windspeaker's Blessing, just great overall for anyone who is a supporter who's going to be putting shields on. Now, your heals and shields being 10% stronger is not ridiculously amazing. It's not crazy. In fact, a 10% stronger shield isn't really necessarily any better than like what Bond of Stone might give you by absorbing 8% damage from your teammates. But what it does do is massive. It increases your target's resists by 15%. And as long as it's not used on you. So unlike this mastery here, Unyielding, where it's percent bonus armor and MR, this just gives 15% straight up. Which means the guy who's at 42 MR from running runes is just getting 6 more MR off this shield. The guy is at like 70 armor because everyone is at 70 armor by late game is just getting another 10 armor. And on tanks, it's even crazier. This is a good freaking mastery for the buff supports. It's obviously only for the buff supports, but it's really good on them. If you buy a locket, maybe. Maybe Thresh uses this. I doubt it highly. Let's move on to the Resolve Tree. The Resolve Tree is pretty solid. You get some base health regen. Actually, it's not base health regen. It doesn't get multiplied by other sources that multiply your health regen. But it's some regen. If your lane sucks, you can do this. And it's up against a mastery that's only good if you're going to be buying tank items. And the weird thing is, if you're playing a champion like Darius, you're buying a lot of health on those guys, right? You're buying Black Cleaver into Sterix, Gauge, maybe even a Trinity Force. None of these are giving you armor and MR defensive stats. Not until you go into Spirit Visage or Randuin Zoman or Frozen Heart are you getting things that affect Unyielding. Don't get screwed up by this mastery. Now, there's plenty of other ways to get regen, which means I don't think recovery is going to be bought all that often on guys that can build defensive things. But keep in mind, Unyielding is maybe not quite as good as you might think, but also keep in mind there's a lot of other regen sources that makes you maybe not want to go recovery, because you have Secret Stash, you have Feast, you have Vampirism, you even have like things like Dangerous Game. Next tier, Explorer versus Tough Skin. Tough Skin is going to be brought on almost everyone that runs into the defensive tree. If you're going down here at all into Resolve, you're probably getting Tough Skin. Pretty much any jungle that's not a full glass cannon is going to be going for Tough Skin here. But of course, not everyone is going to be going into this tree, so you might not get it in the jungle. Explorer, just strong in general. Its movement speed, it's pretty nice. The supports that aren't tank supports are probably going to be running Explorer. They're going to be getting this 12 movement speed in Brush and River, and this 3% move speed out of combat, and zipping around the map a fair bit. This is actually some nice ways to get some move speed in your gameplay. It's pretty solid. Next, now we go into the 12 pointers here and the rank ups. Runic Armor, 8% bonus to all shields and healing on you, including lifesteal and regen. This includes a Janna shielding you, as well as you healing up as Aurelia. Unsurprisingly, this Aurelia page is running this Runic Armor Mastery, because, yeah, healing yourself is a big part of that kit. Dr. Mundo's going to run this, Aurelia's going to run this, Renekton's going to run this. But if you don't heal yourself, I don't think you really rely on people shielding you, and instead you just run Veteran Scars. If you're already running 12 points deep into Resolve, you're probably a bit tanky, which means you're going to be buying a lot of health, and as Darius or something, you might run Veteran Scars. Of course, as Darius, you heal yourself, so you're going to be running Runic Armor, but again, if you're a guy that doesn't heal yourself and you are tanky, of course, you run Veteran Scars. Next up, Insight versus Perseverance. Insight is a 15% reduced summoner spell cooldown. That's a big deal. Perseverance, 50% bonus health regen, also a big deal. And it goes up to plus 200% when you're low. Now, this is your base health regen. This does not count things like Dr. Bundo's ultimate. It does not count things like Volibear passive. This is your champion's health regen, which means it sucks on Riven and it's bad on Gnar. But it's still 50% bonus base health regen. I mean, this is already on almost any champion in the game just straight up better than Recovery. Just automatically. Now, of course, Insight's an amazing mastery, so you have to choose, but you're basically making the choice between how afraid am I of my laning matchup and can I go greedy with a better summoner spell mastery? And I don't know. That's going to be up to you. And again, the thing is, you're only really ever going this far in if you're playing a support that's going into the Cunning tree and then just grabbing Insight, or if you're already going 18 points into the Resolve tree, and at which point, maybe you're getting Insight, maybe you're getting Perseverance, we don't know. But these aren't raw tank stats in either case, right? Next up, Swiftness, 15% tenacity and slow resist. Remember, it's tenacity and slow resist, so it's really, really good at getting you out of sticky situations. Or Legendary Guardians, which is the first time in this entire tree it's given you raw tank stats that don't care about the tank stats you've already gotten. Which, again, goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the Mastery discussion. You can't just choose to be tanky by going in this tree. You get into this tree because you were choosing to be tanky. Like, because you were building tanky, you can go into this tree. Legendary Guardian, of course, is very good for the resistances. If you're playing a pure tank or someone who really needs to be nimble, you might want the tenacity here. If you're really trying to be nimble, you want the tenacity here. But if you're just playing a straight-up tank, this is up to 15 armor and magic resist in a team fight. It's a lot of stats. It's a lot of stats, and you're probably going to end up running this if your goal is to be tanky, but if your goal is to get around, you're probably going to run this on someone like Aurelia. Singe, you'll probably run it too. Then we get to those glorious gold medals, these glorious Keystone Masteries. Grasp of the Undying is actually amazing if you're going to be landing auto attacks in team fights. If you've been in combat for 4 seconds, then if you land a basic attack, you get 3% max health back. Or if you're ranged, you get 1.5%. But no one who's ranged should basically ever be running this mastery. So it really doesn't matter. Next up, a mastery that I personally have as a bit weak right now, in my opinion. It's basically an eventual 300 max health. That doesn't suck. I mean, 300 health is 300 health. It's a lot. But I don't think it's quite as good as other masteries. This builds up by you or nearby allies killing siege minions or large jungle monsters. This will build up by about, I'm going to say, probably like 25 minutes into the game is roughly when it's going to happen for you. And then once you reach that point, then those kills just restore health instead. I just don't think it's as good as the mastery that's next to it, which is Bond of Stone. Bond of Stone is crazy good. You get 4% damage reduction while alone. You get 8% damage reduction while near a teammate. 8% damage reduction is freaking insane. Every tank support will be running this because they're in a duo lane next to a teammate. Even junglers and top laners can make use of the 4% damage reduction, and then, well, down the line when they get into team fights, they get this other part where it doubles to 8%. Also, if your goal is to be a tank, and again, if you're playing Aurelia, your goal is not really to be a tank, you just want to be tanky. But if your goal is to be a tank, you're playing Gnar, you're playing Scion, you're playing Maokai, the second part is ridiculous. 8% of the damage that your nearby teammates would take from champions is now dealt to you. So in a team fight, I mean, everyone says, like, you don't want to have to focus the tank, but you're going to have to anyway because it's the tank. If there's ever an assassin running around killing your back line, you're giving them 8% damage reduction as well, basically, because you're taking it and you can withstand the assassin damage. This mastery is insane. Okay,